There are many ways in which people can travel and find out interesting, mysterious, or simply beautiful things. Our character, who will help us discover Transylvania, will search in old books, some almost forgotten, from big libraries or public archives, fascinating, full of mystery histories and legends about its inhabitants, either princes, knights, or ordinary people, as well as about a terrible but famous vampire, whose story is known all over the world. The Bran Castle is one of the most visited in Romania. Neither its grandeur and age of over 6 centuries make it so interesting, nor its geographical location, which dominates the mountain's gorge, with thick forests and pleasant-looking landscapes. But there is something else, namely a wish of adventure or some unprecedented feelings of fear and fascination the tourists experience when coming here. Because it is said that this is the castle of Dracula, the vampire count. And this is how it is explained that there are a lot of people who would like to pay for spending the night at the castle, probably armed with a crucifix and plenty of garlic. The overseas tourists are especially attracted by such experiments, as many of them are discovering only now, with surprise, that Transylvania of Count Dracula really exists. So far, Transylvania was not a real province of modern Romania to them, but an imaginary land, a writer's fantasy. Each wall, stairway, tower, or even any piece of furniture can be a symbol at the Bran Castle, a link element between the real and the imaginary world. But vampire Dracula has never been in Bran, at least not in the novel. The writer Bram Stoker chose another place in Transylvania to localize the castle of Dracula in his book, namely somewhere near Bistrița, which is located much more north of Bran. After publishing his novel in 1897, he was congratulated for his correct suggestive descriptions, although he had never visited these lands. The town of Bistrița is indeed, as Stoker wrote, an ancient, very interesting small town with a tumultuous existence. Looking at the cathedral and at the downtown buildings with eyes half closed, the modern aspects dissipate and we can go back in time to the past centuries. Bistrița is the nearest town to the Dracula castle. Beyond it, the road climbs to the Bârgău Gorge, the place of the terrifying castle, vast and ruined, built up on a mountain's peak, especially to be a 3-sided fortress with its windows beyond the reach of a bow and arrow. The castle of Count Dracula was, as the Irish writer says, just on the borders of 3 states, Transylvania, Moldavia, and Bukovina, in the midst of the Carpathian Mountains, one of the wildest and least known parts of Europe. Romania is a beautiful country, full of the most unthinkable marvels. but its people are very, very superstitious. In the Middle Ages, this region of Europe was the venue of a strong opposition to the expansion of Catholicism. In order to make the Orthodox Christians become Catholics, it is thought that 4 centuries ago, the Catholic envoys took advantage of those who were frightened by vampires, causing terrible scare in the poor souls. They said that all the people already buried in unholy land would have been refused the lasting rest of heaven and would have become vampires. Therefore, it is here, in this land of Transylvania, at the edge of civilized Europe, unknown but full of magic, mystery and superstitions, that Bram Stoker chose to place the chaos out of which this cursed being, vampire Dracula, neither dead nor alive, but both altogether, appeared. Anyhow, as the vampire Count Dracula is fictional, so are the traces of his castle never found. The novel's end is optimistic. Dracula tries to reach his castle by traveling all day in a coffin, but he is defeated by his pursuers before the sunset, thus saving the world from a monster. Few local individuals have heard in these places of vampire Dracula from Bram Stoker's novel. Yet vampires are still present in all their superstitions. So, it is said that vampires can do a lot of harm. They kill first the members of their own families, then, from the bell tower of the church, they call for the other villagers who die on the spot as well. The vampire can be killed only by piercing his heart with a stake, the same way in which St. George killed the dragon with a spear. And that is why we are not at all surprised by the numerous depictions of this confrontation in Transylvania. The most spectacular being, perhaps, the bronze-cast statue made in 1373 by Martin and Gheorghe, craftsmen of Cluj. The statuary group is unique. It is unlike any other equestrian statues of the Gothic, and it almost competes with those of the fascinating Italian Quattrocentos. It is the depiction of a never-ending confrontation between good and evil. The dragon also being the symbol of Lucifer's army, which opposes the angels' army of God. Dracula, the real character, is a ruler of the Romanian country, also called Wallachia, in the 15th century. His name, Dracula, came from his fathers and meant the son of Dracul, meaning that person who wore a title of knight with the order of dragon, Draco in Latin, a title given to him by the Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg. The legends have woven threads so tangled around the personality of Vlad Tzepes Dracula that the truth will always interweave with a mystery. The terrifying stories spread by the German merchants of Brașov, Bistrița or Sibiu made him, in the imagination of Transylvania's and the rest of Europe's inhabitants, a demonic, fierce and bloodthirsty character, a vampire. This was the manner in which the merchants reacted to the severe measures taken by the ruler against those who did not observe the duty regulations. At those terrifying times, when any terrible story was listened to with greed, then retold at scary dimensions, the German stories about the Romanian ruler started being believed, although in Rome and Venice, Vlad Țepeș was seen after his resounding victories against the Ottoman Empire as a hero of Christianity. The people, just like today, needed some sensational, terrible stories coming from far away, from places where it was much worse than where they lived. Later, the medieval historians will try to make a portrait of him very much close to the real one. In Cosmography, or the description of the world talking about the Romanian prince, Sebastian Münster pointed out Dracula's vocation for justice and for independence from the Turks. It is reminded that Dracula was very cruel and that he loved justice like nobody else in the world, and that he had impaled several Turks while he was standing among them feasting with his friends. He was so cruel that even in that barbarian country, anybody could keep one's treasures in the middle of the forests and couldn't be safer. It seems that Vlad Țepeș Dracula was born in 1430 in this very house of the ancient and fortified town of Sighișoara. It is a solid house with fortress-like thick walls. A fragment of a 15th century family fresco has been saved somewhere. Could it be the portrait of Țepeș? It is a mystery which might never be solved. Just near the house of Dracula there is the clock tower, a real symbol of the town, built much earlier in the 14th century. Naturally, the clock was added later, at the beginning of the 17th century. In the times of Dracula, few people were interested in knowing the division of the day in hours, and they could hardly say how old they were. Well-educated, with a great ability in the use of weapons, speaking several foreign languages, Vlad is appointed at a young age to the command of the border armies of South Transylvania. Here we are in the summer of 1456. The man who had shown him trust and appreciation was Ioan of Hunedoara, also known as Iancu, governor of Hungary and ruler of Transylvania. Vlad received a good welcome here at Hunedoara, at the castle of the great knight Ioan, the hero of Christianity, the first one who had ever dared to attack the Ottomans since they invaded this part of Europe. Ioan of Hunedoara had made a promise when being elected governor that he would defend the entire Hungary, but this never made him forget his small Carpathian country and lose his Romanian instinct. At that time, the castle did not look like what we see today. Each generation which owned it built and transformed something here and there. That is why the castle is a complete lesson of Gothic architecture, with all its elements, since its very ancient age to the flamboyant style of its last stage of development. Also here, there are interlaced some legends, from the very old one which says that the construction of the castle belonged to an age when the giants were ruling the world, and it is the daughter of a strong giant who built it, till the one which describes the origin of Iancu of Hunedoara, immortalized on his blazon. It is said that when he was very young, Ioan killed a raven with his arrow for stealing his glamorous ring, the only proof of his royal origins. Impressed by that story, King Sigismund of Hungary decided on the spot that the raven with a ring in its beak should be Ioan's blazon, and his people should be highly honored by granting him the land of Hunedoara. And before he died, after defending Belgrade from the armies of Muhammad II, the conqueror of Constantinople, the Pope of Rome himself recognized his merits, calling him the most powerful, unique defender of Jesus Christ. We now return to the history of Vlad Țepeș, who did not spend very much of his time in these places at the Corvinești castle of Hunedoara, and that is because soon afterwards he will take the throne of Wallachia, where he will start to face the Ottomans. But first of all, he had to make order in his own country. So he established extremely severe measures against all those who broke the law, and among them those German merchants who, as in a modern war of disinformation, created him a very bad portrait. His usual punishment was the impaling of the guilty, and that's how Țepeș, the Impaler, became his nickname. However, let's not forget that such violent methods were generally used in the Middle Ages. From as far away as Moscow to the Atlantic coasts, history has recorded this aspect. Ivan III, Louis XI, the Visconti, Sforza and Borgia families, with their Pope Alexander VI of the Bright Italy, Richard III, or the Inquisitors, used the axe of the executioner, the rope, the burning at the stake, or the tortures, with more or less political reasons. For the spirit of the Middle Ages, these were moral performances for the people at large, which is hard to imagine for us in today's world. It is not only the cruelty of justice, but also the beast-like joy of the people in front were experiencing with excitement, willing to delight themselves with new tortures. Vlad Țepeș Dracula was murdered meanly by one of his close people who was paid by the Turks and who stabbed him in the back. The Romanian prince was then at the mature age of 45, and he merely reached the throne of the Romanian country for the third time. He lived an almost sensational life, and his deeds, which became legendary during his lifetime, were soon to transform into a real mythology, spreading amazingly and uniquely in the universal culture of history. Today, most of the time he is confounded with the imaginary character of Bram Stoker, the vampire with the same name, Dracula. For Transylvania, the colonizing of the Germans, some of whom became the opponents of ruler Vlad Țepeș, had almost the same important influence as the Greek colonization had had in antiquity. They came from Flanders, the Middle Rhine and Saxon, chased away by the feudal oppression, but most of all being attracted by the opportunities which they were offered here. Since the 14th century, Sighișoara was ruled by top representatives of the craftsmen guilds. It was these guilds that built up and organized the entire defensive system of walls, towers, and everything that meant armament. In 1564, the Italian Giovanandrea Gromo, the commander of the Prince's Guards, tells us in his description of Transylvania dedicated to Cosimo de' Medici, Prince of Florence, the following picture of Sighișoara. This fortress is more graceful than fortified. The hill on which the fortress lies is so isolated and far from the other hills surrounding it that the installation of artillery and its attack would be difficult. The life of the citadel enjoyed also some moments of peace. The feelings of love created moments of tender passion. But there was violence too. The tournament brought the heroic image motivated by love. The man, animated by an ideal of chivalry, was showing his courage in his way to his beloved woman. If necessary, the knight will fight, will suffer, and will bleed to protect his worshipped lover. Outside the towns, the villagers fortified their churches and built around them strong defensive fortresses. The town inhabitants, the merchants and the free peasants were encouraged at the beginning by King Mateus Corvin, the son of Ioan of Hunedoara. He gave them help and facilities with temporary exemptions from their military duties or by cutting their taxes. Times became harder and harder. The image of death resounded menacing in those times. The fortress of Appold is situated in the middle of a village on top of a hill. As a general principle of fortification, the fortress is designed after the system of multiple concentric perimeters, so the advantages of the field were used with much cleverness. Once the enemy was spotted on the horizon, the bells began to sound and all the villagers were gathering inside the fortress. The entrances into the two areas of the fortress were located in such a manner that the enemy who would have succeeded in getting through the first gate would have to go through bigger and bigger obstacles. Once the peril was announced, the inhabitants brought their assets and livestock inside the fortress to shelter them. The drawbridge at the entrance was up, the portcullises were down, and the soldiers on duty and the fighters were on their watching positions. Then life followed its natural course, waiting for the siege to stop. From the fortified towers of Biertan, the faraway skyline could be seen from where help could have appeared. The 2 to 5 meter thick walls, sometimes 15 meter high, were provided with watching areas and with crenels and closed balconies, as it is, for instance, this fortress of Harman. Through the niches of the walls, the defenders could throw down on the attackers arrows, bullets, stones, or boiled water. The towers at Kilnik were designed in such a manner that in case of an attack, the enemy would be caught in the crossfire. In his memoirs, a student tells us how he was the only one who survived the siege of the Ottoman army against the Sebeş fortress. Here, the inhabitants resisted being locked in the Tower of the Tailors. Finally, the Turks defeated them with the use of fire. This side of the fortification was known since then as the Tower of the Student. From that student, who was studying Latin and theology in a Dominican school, remained the oldest incunabulum by an author from the Romanian countries. He was known as the Transylvanian prisoner, and his writing, which appeared after his 20-year prison term, is called Treatise about the Beliefs, Customs, Life and Cunningness of the Turks. These incunabula are the first European printings of the second half of the 15th century, made with the help of the movable letter printing machine, a crucial invention of Gutenberg. For Gutenberg and his generation, the printing was not only a new technology, it was also an art. The efficiency of the technical work, the clearness of the printing, and the lasting quality of these books had reached a point from which no significant progress will be achieved in the next 4 centuries. Besides the perils from the outside, there were also perils from the inside of the country, namely the fighting of the nobility to occupy the ruler's chair after Transylvania is proclaimed an autonomous principality. The 16th century was as full of troubles as the previous one. In the other battle camp of the besiegers, some precise military or political reasons were aimed for, but very often the war degenerated in a series of robbery and plunder actions. And night was their best ally. Generally, the ceremony of knighting was led by a bishop who would bless the sword of the future knight, but here, on the battlefield, the knighting was much more glorious. The fortress of Kodla, flanked by powerful towers, well preserved by the craftsmen guilds, was once besieged unsuccessfully by a captain of Voivod Dracula. The German writings describe that the unlucky captain was punished, naturally, by impaling. Făgăraș is a very well-protected fortress, built at the bottom of the mountains which separate Transylvania from Wallachia. This fortress is like a small dukedom. The Romanian noblemen of Făgăraș were obeying the castle lord as if he had been their ruler. The besiege of Făgăraș fortress was led by Dracula himself. The same stories show the voivod eating while surrounded by dead bodies and being happy with a gruesome sight. At Prejmer, near Brașov, the walls measure around 5 meters at the bottom. They are circular, and along their inside yard there are numerous dwellings and storage places with connecting porches and stairways. The triptych altar of Prejmer, whose design reminds of the Gothic style of the middle of the 15th century, belongs to the South German art brought through Austria. The biblical scenes show Jesus Christ on the cross between Mary and John, the wailing, the burial, the resurrection, and the 2 women at the grave. But the most significant monument, with both Austrian and Dutch influence, is the triptych altar of the Mediaș Evangelical Church. We have in front of us a rare Transylvanian painting, a genuine piece of art. The scenes from the history of Passion still preserved are the kiss of Judas, the whipping, the thorn crowning, the mocking, the bearing of the cross, the preparation of the cross, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. All these images, which served in the Middle Ages more than anything else to educate the society, generally illiterate, pointed out the unbearable feeling of a general insecurity. From the isolated individual to the whole community, this feeling was prevailing in that period of time, which was so tormented with military fights. People were thinking only in visual representations. All they wanted to express had to be displayed in a simple image. These images were read and interpreted from the beginning to the end. The final image seemed to be happy enough with the promise of reaching heaven. The poor mankind needed the promise repeated daily regarding the heavenly redemption and the care and kindness of God. The lion was a symbol of power. At Mănăștur in Cluj, there is the only tangible proof of the monastery life before the year 1285, when, after the great invasion of the Tatars, the monks dissipated. There remained the lion, as a sign of bravery to confront the dark powers of the evil. The mentality of the medieval man was dominated by the permanent threats of the evil, impersonated by the devil. The latter's representations were threatening and infernal. He was the one responsible for the huge epidemics, the famine periods, or the pagan invasions. It is the churches that dominated the towns with their grand, perfect lines and volumes, no matter how high and heavy were the stone houses of the nobility and merchants. We are still in Cluj, at St. Michael's Church, which is the first complete example of a Transylvanian hall church. Here, as in any other European cathedral, all the social classes met, rich and poor. The beggars and the sick were lamenting, showing their wounds and deformities, while the great noblemen and the rich people were displaying their jewelry and luxury clothes. Sibiu is a large and powerful town, having not only grand buildings but also flourishing businesses and multiple assets. Then its walls, large and solid, are very well fortified, with thick towers and a large deep moat which surrounds it from all over, except from the east. This is the image of Sibiu, which about 5 centuries ago was given to us by Nicolaus Olahus, a nobleman, archbishop and diplomat, author of some historical, geographical and religious works. Much closer to our times, at the beginning of the 19th century, in this pharmacy of Sibiu, we could have met mysterious Johann Martin Honigberger preparing his medicines. The obscure life, drowned in legend, of this German pharmacist, who gave himself the title of a doctor by his own good decision, as he officially had only a pharmacist diploma, is described by Mircea Eliade in his short story The Secret of Dr. Honigberger. The latter spent more than half of his long life in the Orient, where he learned the occult practices. He was even the medical doctor of the royalty, the pharmacist, the director of the arsenal, and the admiral of the Maharaja of Lahore. But the life of Honigberger hides several incredible secrets. It is alleged that he reached Tibet, where he studied the science of the occult pharmacopoeia. Looking at the fire was not only a pretext of hypnotic trance, but also an assimilation, an introduction of the mind in one's own body to identify all the energy inside. He knew the levitation, the cataleptic trance, meaning the leaving of the soul from the body, and the suspension of life without harming the body. He also knew the miracle of invisibility. He got to Shambhala thanks to his yoga techniques, which he was a master of before 1858. According to the Tibetan tradition, this mysterious flourishing land, full of vegetation, is situated somewhere in the snowy mountains of the Himalayan chain in northern Tibet. Only a few yogis with perfect techniques may reach in supernatural ways this miraculous country, otherwise geographically non-accessible. So, Honigberger was there, and Eliade writes that he was permitted to leave Shambhala only in order to reactivate some centers of initiations in Western Europe, which had been stagnating since the Middle Ages. There is a supposition that he did not know how to accomplish this mission, or that he even compromised it from the very beginning, and that is why he died in such a mysterious way when returning to Brasov, where we are now. The downtown buildings are the same ones Honigberger has seen, and so are the streets. As for the people, some of them are perhaps the descendants of those Honigberger shook hands and talked with. We would like to know how he would have interpreted this detail, which is perhaps a basilisk, a fabulous reptile which kills with the power of its eyes, and may be caught only with the help of a mirror, because the reflected image of the reptile would return against itself. Could it be the symbol of royalty, which punishes the one who does not show one's respect? Or more than a medical or alchemist symbol, could it be an image of one's subconsciousness which we should look at and recognize its value in order not to become its victims? Honigberger left this place to discover the world, which he did also through the 12 languages he was speaking, and came back here at the end of his life. Brasov is a town with images which can conclude a movie, as well as the exciting life of a man. Things which make life beautiful stay unchanged. Now, as it used to be before, these things are reading, music, fine arts, nature, traveling. Only by looking deep in our souls, we will be able to know how much we need all these wonderful things to cheer up our life. Since discovering that death can mean an inevitable ending, mankind wanted to touch immortality. Perhaps Dr. Honigberger himself strove to become immortal by everything he undertook and knew. I still believe that people are close to immortality by what they reach to know and discover. Think about all the past, described in books and documents, or through churches, citadels and castles, about all those people of the previous ages whom we come to know and understand. For those tens, hundreds, or maybe thousands of years of which we have a general view, we are really mortal.